Now, South Sudan's army has ordered all civilians, United Nations staff, and aid workers to leave three counties in Jonglei State, Nurol, Uro, and Akobo. This within 48 hours ahead of a major offensive against opposition forces. The United Nations says that the fighting in Jonglei is at a scale not seen in years, and more than 180,000 people have already been displaced as violence threatens to widen. The UN's human rights body has warned that inflammatory rhetoric and rising command failures risk mass atrocities and further unraveling of the fragile peace process. Joining us from Juba to unpack how these orders are affecting civilians and what it means for South Sudan's future is Mr. Edmund Yakani Berzelius, Executive Director of the Community Empowerment Organization, a leading South Sudanese civil society group focused on peace building, governance, and human rights. Thank you very, very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Yeah, thank you for hosting me, and it's an opportunity.
Let's start with the scene on the ground at the moment. The state have been ordered to evacuate, and I wonder what is driving this latest directive from the army.
Thank you very much. If you're aware, South Sudan, after obtaining independence from the rest of Sudan in 2011, we only stayed 2 years. Then we resumed a civil war among ourselves from 2013, resolved in 2015 through an IGAD-mediated peace process. Couldn't work. In 2018, it was revitalized, yet couldn't work because of a deficit between President Salva and his rival, Dr. Riek Machar, who is the leading of the opposition. Now in Jonglei, the situation merged last year in March 2025 when the South Sudan People's Defense Forces army under the command of President Salva clashed with the rebel group of SPLA-IO under Dr. Riek Machar, and the clash is to a level of where one of the South Sudan People's Defense Forces under General Majur was killed. That led to the arrest of Riek, being detained for a while, and now Riek's undergoing trial. And because of trial of Dr. Riek Machar, the deficit in trust and confidence between the army of the government, which is SSPDF, and the rebel army led by Dr. Riek Machar, SPLA-IO, grew very high because some of the members of the IO were also arrested, detained with Riek Machar. Some flee the country, some were dismissed from the government. So the deficit in trust and confidence resumed the current military confrontation between the forces of the government, the forces led by Dr. Riek Machar, as by then as a rebel group, but they're now partner in peace. So the crisis is very bad. The situation is disturbing. The situation is horrible. The situation is described by huge humanitarian crisis, commitment of human rights atrocities. So it's a situation that you can say the country is returning back to full-scale war. Civilian protection and safety is really at high risk and being threatened. And that's why you can see now the spokesperson of South Sudan People's Defense Forces issuing that order, which is, yes, a rule in any military engagement, but unfortunately, civilians are at high risk in the face of the military confrontation between the South Sudan People's Defense Forces and the forces of SPLA-IO under Dr. Riek Machar, who is the former first vice president, suspended and now undergoing trial in Juba.
So Nurol, Uro, and Akobo have been particularly affected. Is there a risk and a danger that this could widen?
Obviously, the counties you pronounce, Akobo, Nurol, Uro, is a triangle of an area which is highly populated. And along the side of that particular environment, there's a real climate shocks, there's a floods in that area. And there's a huge communal violence among the communities associated with cattle theft, armed cattle theft, or what we term as cattle raiding. So there's a high risk that the military confrontation in these three counties will push the countries to fall back into full-scale war and will raise huge humanitarian crisis in those populations. And unfortunately, the army had adopted a new strategy that they don't want to see civilian population running to an assemble point that will make them establish an internal displaced camps. They want the civilians to run in without any establishment like camps. And that is going to be risky because civilians will be facing no any humanitarian assistance. They will be battling with the wildlife in the bushes, things like snakes, mosquitoes, and they will also be facing hunger because they'll be running to areas where there's no food. They have left their livelihood behind. Their livelihood been destroyed. So we must expect soon a real humanitarian disaster situation in those three areas. And that may lead the military confrontation between the army and the armed opposition scale up, and likely the town of Bor, the seat of Jonglei State, may be also under attack. And as we speak now, there's a huge panic in Bor town, which is the seat of Jonglei State. And historical, whenever Bor is affected, Juba automatically is affected because it's close to Juba. That's why whatever is happening in Akobo, in Nirol, in Urol is causing a panic in Juba town. And I think South Sudan People Defense Forces are a bit worried about the scale of how the armed opposition are scaling up in capturing towns from government. And they are also having access to weaponry, heavy weaponry, because government soldiers have stayed for almost 1 year without receiving salaries. So what they decided to do is they quit and leave all the heavy artilleries to the hands of the rebels. And that means a big risk to Juba. And remember, South Sudan is at a position where we have an unfolding situation in Sudan. So supply of arms through illegal armed traders from Sudan to South Sudan, where the market is very high. So even the rebels may have access to weaponry more than the government in regular basis because of the flow of weapons from Sudan crisis to South Sudan.
Despite the 48-hour warning, are people able to move safely to safety?
As I've said, that area is also affected with the floods, climate shock. So people found themselves at fixed. Where will you go? The surrounding is full of floods. That is one particular environmental issue. And besides that, you can go to areas where there's no food. Where will you eat? So some population of the civilians have sacrificed their life. They are waiting to whatever will happen besides this ultimatum. And we don't see huge population movement because of this ultimatum, simply because people's livelihood is being affected. And where will they go where there's no livelihood? As I say, there's a floods around, there's a lot of cattle theft among the communities. Where will they go? And this is a population that their livelihood is determined by rearing cattle. So these are killers. Where will they go with their cattle?
We're hearing of warnings about inflammatory rhetoric and a risk of mass atrocities as a result. What kind of language is being used?
One of the assistant chief of staff for South Sudan People Defense Forces, known as General Johnson Olony, he is a warlord, by the way. He's not a professional army. I have to make it very clear. All in my life, in history about him, I know him as a warlord, being aided by then by Sudan. So he is right now commanding the forces of South Sudan People Defense Forces in Jonglei State, specifically targeting these three areas of Akobo, Nirol, and Urol. He issued this statement, I quote, he said if his forces under his command reach to these three areas, Akobo, Nirol, or Urol, they should not spare anyone, elderly, children, including chicken. So they should wipe out everything that is a living thing, because he believes that that's the only peace that the government is looking for. That is loaded with hate speech by describing some human beings as a chicken, or by sort of like really trying to put a message that some human beings are not more important, like chicken. That's something that's disturbing. And also saying don't spare anyone, including elderly and children. That means persons with disability, women who are vulnerable, people who are sick, all should be killed. That have raised a huge condemnation among South Sudanese, and that is the seat of genocide. My brother, if you look at histories of genocide across the world, and in Africa, if we take a case study of Rwandan genocide, it starts with hate speech. It starts with hatred sentiments. It starts with hostile propaganda. And now we are involved in that. If you see in the social media, we're involved in tracking social media. The level of hate speech and hostile propaganda among the communities of Jonglei State in terms of ethnic alignment is really very high. And even people are saying we need to deal with him. The language of cockroach is now being used recently in social media, and specifically for the last 2 days. And this is a clear indicator why we have genocide in Rwanda. So South Sudan is in a virtue of facing a genocide. Unfortunate situation is that the world and the continent will keep on saying, we don't want to see Rwanda again. My message as an activist is that in South Sudan, in Jonglei State, in the parts of Nirol, Urol, and Akobo, Rwandan case is happening now. When should we stop it?
There's been a civil war, literally, I mean, for decades now. Sadly, for a significant period of time now. Is this the worst that it's been since? I mean, is it... We're talking about escalation. Just how bad has it reached in comparison to the fighting we've seen in the past?
It has reached a level where you find people have been denied food. Starvation has been used as a weapon of war. Besides, human rights atrocities are happening. If you look at UN OCHA figures, it's really alarming, disturbing. Yes, it may be small area, but if you see the nature of the atrocities, if you see the nature of the human suffering, if you see the nature of humanitarian challenges, it's really, really, really bad. And it's one of the sins that we may not compare with 2013 or 2016 crisis. It's a sin that is challenging. And imagine population is forced to die in the waters of the floods, battling with snakes, with mosquitoes, without any humanitarian assistance. And also it happened in a moment where the global community are seriously engaged in cutting humanitarian assistance. So we don't expect any humanitarian aid to come to those vulnerable population. And also imagine the policy of the government where no IDP camps should be established. What does this mean? This is a complete human rights atrocities. This is a really genocide. This is really a challenge. But will this stop? My answer, this will never stop. And I'd like to take this opportunity, my brother, if you can allow, as I'm speaking to citizens, to audience of South Africa have a very big historical touch with South Sudan. Of lately, the Vice President of South Africa was here, and we are aware that Dr. Riek Machar, who is undergoing trial, was kept in South Africa under detention for almost a period of 2 years when we were revitalizing the agreement. And we have seen also South Africa leading the AU5 countries, that is to help South Sudan to transition from violence to peace. And we are aware there's a historical tie between South Africa and South Sudan. ANC and our ruling party, SPLM, they have a ties. So my appeal to South African audience through your platform is that, yes, South Sudan may look far from South Africa, but humanity connects us. Peace and security is our common interest. I hope your platform can motivate South Africans to advocate for peace and stability in South Sudan through their government. Thank you very much.
What role can civil society organizations like yours, CEPO, play in supporting communities during a crisis like this?
Obviously, we are advocating for their safety. We are advocating for their protection. We are advocating for humanitarian assistance to reach out to them. We are documenting human rights atrocities that have been committed. But also, we are involved in facilitating dialogue among the warring parties. As I speak with you now, next week we'll be having an inclusive dialogue among the warring parties with an intention of de-escalating the violence and pushing for declaration of ceasefire, so that at least the civilian population will not face the challenge they're facing. So we are involved, we are advocating. Like right now, as I'm speaking to you, we are amplifying the suffering of the people through various media platforms like yours. We'd like to thank you for offering this opportunity. So we are involved in safety, protection, documentation of human rights, atrocities, advocating for humanitarian assistance, and also making sure dialogue is embraced rather than military solution to political crisis. So we are there demanding for accountability, demanding for justice, but also pushing for the parties to prefer dialogue rather than military confrontation.
Edmund, sadly, we've run out of time, but thank you so much indeed for that comprehensive update on the situation in South Sudan. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
That was Edmund Yakani Berezilius, who's the Executive Director of the Community Empowerment for Progress organization, a leading South Sudanese civil society group focused on peace building, governance and human rights, talking to us about the desperate situation in South Sudan around Jonglei.